1, 2, 3, all eyes on me. So you might have noticed that I put some words up on our board. Now let's go ahead and as a class, let's read the words together. So I'm going to get my pointing finger and we're going to start with this one right here. You guys ready? Let's start. After. One more time. After. Good job. Next. Finally. Finally. Good. Then. Last one. First. Good job. So when we see our sight words here on the board, they all are kind of in this order, but they're all really important words when we're talking about something in particular. What do all of these words make you think of? What do you think of when you see these words?
Kind of when somebody tells a story.
Yeah, like a story. These are story words. But something looks a little different about these words. Can anybody tell me what's wrong with my sight words? Ian?
They're all scrambled.
They're all scrambled, exactly. My words aren't in order. Now, when we are talking about a story and we see words that are all out of order, do you think our story would make much sense? I don't think so either. Now, today's lesson, we're going to be talking about history. Now, does anybody know what the word history means? What do you think when you hear the word history? Ian?
Events in the past.
Events in the past, things that happened a while ago, things that have happened yesterday, things that happened a couple of years ago. History is the past. So we're going to be learning about history today, but before we get into our lesson, I think we should unscramble our words, don't you? So let's go ahead. Which word should come before all of the others? Laura?
I think it's first.
First is correct. So we're going to take my word first and we're going to put it over here. Now, what should come after first? Here, we got this one too. Which one do you think should come after first? Might be tricky. Laura?
Then.
Then is correct. Good job. So we're going to put the word then right next to first. All right, so we've got two options left. Where should they go? Ian?
After should go past then, and then finally should be at the left end.
Let's see, does that look right to everybody?
Yes.
Perfect, that is correct. So there we go. So our words are in order, and we're going to be using those words in a little bit. Now, like I said, today we're going to be learning about history, and we need to kind of think to ourselves, what is history and why is it important? And can history affect how we live today in the present? So those are some of our essential questions that we'll be learning about and thinking about throughout our lesson and throughout our unit. Now, we're also going to be focusing on some objectives and standards. So, our objective for this lesson is given 4 index cards and a topic. The student will work with their team to make a coherent story or timeline of events with 100% accuracy. Now, we're going to be focusing on 2 standards today. Our social studies standard says, understand history tells a story of people and events of other times and places, and our language arts standard says, use words and phrases to signal simple relationships. Now, we are also going to be working towards our learning goal. And our learning goal is to understand that history includes events, people, and ideas from the past that can shape the future of today. And we're going to investigate how events and people from history impacted life today. Now, we're going to go ahead and move on, and we are going to talk a little bit about our own histories, our own past. So I'd like everybody to share a short story from your past. So Miss Mackenzie will go first. So my history / past story is last month I traveled to Georgia. Does anybody know where Georgia is? It's right above us. We're in the state of Florida. Georgia is right above us. So that's where Georgia is, and I drove to Georgia. So Miss Mackenzie drove from Florida to Georgia, and then when she was in Georgia, she got to watch her friend get married, and then after that, her car had a little bit of trouble, but then she was able to get home safe. So that is a story from my past. Let's talk about stories from your past. So Laura, do you want to share a story from your past?
Me and my family went to Disney last year.
Oh, okay. So you went to Disney last year. What did you do at Disney?
We went on rides and we saw a parade and we watched a fireworks show.
That sounds like so much fun. I love Disney. Ian, why don't you share a story from your history?
Last year during a bike ride, I fell over and broke my arm.
Oh my goodness.
Or
Ouch.
Where my dad had to drive me to the hospital so I could get a big blue cast.
Oh my goodness. Has anybody else ever broken their arm before? I've never broken my arm. I don't want to. So, Ian just shared his story about breaking his arm. Now, when you broke your arm, did that hurt a lot? Yeah, I bet it did. So, when you break a bone, sometimes that hurts really bad, and when that happens to you, you learn from it. So, Ian, when you broke your arm, after that, were you extra careful when you were doing anything, especially riding your bike? Yep. So Ian's history of breaking his arm has impacted his life today. He's extra careful because in his past, he hurt himself. So that is a way that history can affect futures or the present. That's what we're living in right now, is the present. So when we talk about history and we talk about those types of things that happen, we understand that those stories are actually real life stories, and that is because history teaches us things from the past, from real life. Now, when we think about history, sometimes people think from really big stories from really long ago, but history doesn't have to be super long ago. History can be even just a couple minutes ago. History is when I just asked you guys to share stories about your history. So, one thing that we can think about history with is events happening and then being put in an order so that you get an outcome. So, let's think about when we get dressed in the morning. When we get dressed in the morning, do we put a jacket on before our shirts? No, we'd look kind of silly if we did that, right? Now, what about our socks and shoes? What do we put on first, socks or shoes?
Socks.
We put on socks first because have you ever tried to put your shoes on or your socks on after you put shoes on? You probably can't do it because the socks don't stretch. So when you put things in a proper order, that is going to give you an outcome. So let's go back to the words that we have on the board and let's make a story so that it makes sense. So for a story, we need a couple of things. I think first we should make a story about a character. Does anybody want to give a character idea for our story? Ian, go ahead.
A dog.
A dog. Okay, let's make a story about a dog. What should the dog's name be? Laura?
Jack.
Jack the dog. Perfect. I love it. So our story is going to be about Jack the dog. Now, what should Jack the dog be doing? Should he be walking? Should he be jumping? What should he be doing?
Going swimming.
He should be going swimming. I like that idea. So we are going to make a story about Jack the dog going swimming. So let's use our sight words and make a story with the first word, which is first. So what should Jack the dog do first in our story? Ian?
Walking to the beach.
Jack walks to the beach. So let's think first, Jack walks to the beach. Now we're going to move on to our next one. Then, what should Jack the dog do after he walks to the beach? Laura?
Jumps in the water.
Good one. So, let's think about it. First, Jack walks to the beach. Then, Jack jumps in the water. I like that. Now, let's use the word after. What should Jack the dog do after he jumps in the water and walks to the beach? What should he do after all of those things? Any ideas? Ian?
He swims.
He goes swimming, yep. So first, Jack the dog walks to the beach. Then Jack the dog jumps in the water. After, Jack the dog swims. And finally, what should Jack the dog do after all of that?
He comes out of the water and shakes.
That's a good one. He gets out of the water and shakes. So let's go ahead and go over our whole story. First, Jack the dog walks to the beach. Then he jumps in the water. After, Jack goes swimming. Finally, Jack gets out of the water and shakes off his body. So when we read that story, that all makes sense. But what if I put the word finally in the beginning? Does it make much sense if I say, finally, Jack the dog got out of the water and shook his body, then he walked to the beach? Does that make any sense? No! So, using these words helps us see that history is a story, because if you take something and put it in a different spot, the story doesn't always make sense. So, events are what leads to a coherent story, something you understand. Each of these things is an event. Jack walking to the beach, Jack getting in the water, Jack swimming, and Jack shaking off. They're all events that lead to the final outcome, which is Jack went swimming, he got wet, and he shook off. So that's what history is like to us. So we're going to practice telling stories and kind of explaining our histories in teams. We're going to be working with a team to make a story. So I'm going to group you guys up. You guys are in a group. And we are going to use index cards to write a story. My index card says, tell us a story about, and on the back of the card, there's going to be a story prompt or a theme. And you are going to use these index cards to write a story with your team members. And then when you write your stories, you guys are going to present them to the class. You're going to read off of your card what it says so that everybody can hear your story. Now, it's important that when you work with your team, you put the events in the proper order, because if you mess one of them up, the whole story doesn't make sense. So you got to work hard to make sure that they're all in correct order. So I'm going to pass out all of your things. You have your pencils. So read your prompt with your classmates, and then you're going to write your stories. And after you're finished, we're going to start presenting them. Now, does anybody have any questions before you start? No questions? Fabulous. Go ahead. Okay, you guys done? All right. Give everybody one more minute to kind of look over their things, and we will go ahead and start presenting. All right, so let's go ahead and start presenting. So my first group, will you guys please tell us your story?
Our story is about losing a first tooth.
Okay, perfect.
So first, my tooth was wiggly and loose.
Then I pulled my tooth out.
After, I put my tooth under my pillow.
Finally, I woke up and found money from the tooth fairy.
Oh my goodness, that sounds like such a fun story. And it seemed like it made sense. So when you guys put the proper things in order, that means that the story makes sense. Very good job. Now I'll go ahead and collect all your things here. And we will go ahead and wrap up our lesson. So, we have finished our little history lesson. Does anybody want to share what their favorite activity was that we did during our lesson? What was your favorite? Laura, what was your favorite?
I liked creating the story about Jack the dog.
I liked that too. That was fun. Ian, do you have a favorite part?
I like sharing our stories with the class.
We like sharing our stories. I like doing that too. So sharing is always lots of fun. So when we are reviewing our lesson, let's think about a little bit what we learned earlier. How can history affect the future? Let's see, we learned about a couple different things today about how history can affect the future. Does anybody want to share an example of how history can affect the future?
Well, like when Ian shared his story, like when you get hurt in some way, it makes you more careful in the present.
Yep, that's what I was thinking too. So because of Ian hurting himself, that affected his future. So the history can affect the future, exactly. Now, with that, how can we use history to help us today? How can we use history to help us today? Ian, do you have any ideas?
By learning from our past mistakes.
Oh, that's a good idea, learning from past mistakes, exactly. So let's see, if Miss Mackenzie is going to a new place, she has learned from the past that she's not going to leave her car keys in the car because she learned from her history. So that's how we can look back on history to help us in the present. Very good. Now, we are going to go over just one last time a little bit about what we learned today in history. So remember that history tells us a story from the past. And so when we learn about history, it can affect our present. So next class, we are going to be learning about those stories from history to teach us how people lived in the past, how people from long time ago lived. A lot of them didn't have light bulbs in their homes like we do. A lot of them didn't have cars like we do. So we are going to be learning about all of that in our next class. So if anybody has any questions, let's go ahead and review our final questions. And that is, what is history? Why is it important? And how does history affect the present? So that's our essential questions we'll be learning through the unit. And if anybody has any questions, go ahead and let me know. And that means we're done.